They wanted to wait until after the hotspot came out today, so then it starts tomorrow, and you can get those applications online, doa.guam.gov. And I'll do that for you, Aaron. Coming up after this interview, I'll go over all the eligibility requirements, all the paperwork you're going to need, because I want you guys to go in ready for this, okay? It's going to be a month-long application period. They're going to be accepting apps from March 15th through April 15th, okay? And we don't know. There hasn't been a determination about, at least as far as I've seen, how much money is going to be available. And I'm not saying it's going to be first come, first serve. It's not. But obviously, our people are in a great state of need. So you're going to want to knock this application out, get everything done as soon as you can. And I'll help you do that coming up here. 7:15. Rlene Steffy joins us. Rlene, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Chris. Glad to be here.
I know I said I was going to play the clip first and then go to you, but this is just really interesting stuff, and I'm going to read the synopsis. So, first of all, welcome back to the KUAM Podcast Network. We're so glad to
Thank
have you
you.
back. And so, for this episode, it's kind of an inaugural episode in a way because she's returning, but she's done some great work with the Podcast Network, and that's why it just kind of seemed like a slam dunk to have you back. So, with this episode, Rlene live reconnects with Miguel Villar. Dr. Miguel Villar. He's a molecular anthropologist, a science writer, and human genetics specialist. More recently, the senior program officer for the National Geographic Society and lead scientist for NGS's Genographic Project, a multi-year anthropology study that aims to map human migration patterns by collecting and analyzing DNA samples from hundreds of thousands of people from around the world. Right, so this is a good get. This guy is like pretty up there. I mean, to put it in layman's terms, Lanny's way up there for the genetics.
He's a big boy.
He is a big boy. And so, our before I play this clip, because that was a lot of scientific lingo there, just really, if you could just narrow it down to exactly what this podcast is about and how it relates to kind of like redefining the CHamoru experience from the very beginning.
Okay, well, Miguel Villar came out here several times to conduct a DNA sampling of the people of the Mariana Islands, and that includes Saipan and Guam. And the primary reason for that is that our areas, and similarly the Philippines and Southeast Asia, have not been studied well as far as the peopling of these places. There have been other priorities, but in the academic world, there are three models that determine where people come from. But really, I introduced in this interview that there are more. And I was so grateful that Miguel caught on to that, because I only hinted. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a scientist, but in my work, I have learned that you cannot determine just from the archaeology, linguistics, and the genetics. Those are the three main ones. But there are more that tell about a people. And so when you listen to this, it's sometimes difficult to understand some of the terminology, but the show does explain it, and I do allow who I'm interviewing to break it down into layman terms. The reason that this is timely, Chris, is because we are very interested in trying to find our connection ourselves to our Pacific Island identity. And I have learned that even other scholars in the academic world will take some of the knowledge that they have, and then they pontificate upon that, and it makes it sound as if they know exactly how this is supposed to work out. But it is not a science in that it's a definitive one, because it's constantly changing when you allow other genetic prints to come into this pool, and it starts to tell us of a broader picture of where we come from. So it specifically shows that the original model, which is more linguistic and archaeology, comes down through dispersal from China to Mongolia to the Taiwan, and then into Guam through the Philippines. Now, what I've learned with academic people, and most people for that matter, unless you can really give them a concrete anchor, they're going to hold on to their belief systems and their research, because that's what it's all about, research. And so I'm very fortunate that I have connections with these guys, and I've been communicating with them many, many, many years. And so I've kind of learned through association, and then just being around them and reading their material. Some of it is very esoteric, but I ask them to break it down because I want to convey this to the layperson, to the people that it matters the most to, and that's what we do research for.
Right. Yeah.
Miguel is very good at that because he's a scientific writer. So his job is to take these academic reports and not dumb them down, but make them understandable to the lay person, and sometimes even to the academic person who doesn't know anything about genetics.
Right. So let me kind of just run through what you just said was, as of now, the linguistic and the archaeological models show that we migrated more towards like the Taiwanese area, but the genetic research contradicts that.
It supports it, but it provides more information that it's coming out of island Southeast Asia.
Okay.
More concrete wise. Okay. So it's very fascinating. I think it's wonderful. And then of course it talks about the migration. They believe that there are maybe 2 main migrations, could be possibly 3. But the more study that is done, the more genetics that is collected, the more archaeology that it's matched with, and we get a better understanding of the larger picture. So it's more research, is more informative.
So this podcast, I know we're going to put it up on our network, so people want to check it on yours. I know you got the YouTube up and running, right?
It's not there yet. I'm allowing KUAM to the privilege of showing it first, and
Thank
then
you.
about maybe a week or 2, we'll put it up it's on Micronesia Publishing
Okay.
on YouTube.
Got it. And so Jay's going to pop that up on our Facebook, I believe, this morning, and then it'll go up on a YouTube. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the KUAM Podcast Network, we're everywhere. You can find a podcast from the Apple Podcast thing, which is on your iPhone. Google Play, they've got it there. You can check out the podcast on that. Spotify. So we've got not just ours content, but a whole bunch of awesome content on this podcast network that I really want you guys to check out. All right, I know it was a little bit of a deep dive, but I want to thank you for kind of explaining this clip that we're about to play, and really just thank you for coming back to the podcast network. We're so excited.
Thanks for the invitation.
With the content you're bringing. I mean, everything. It kind of, if you could, I know that for this episode you're focusing on DNA and CHamoru migration and our history, but other podcasts, can you kind of just give us because I know it's a broad range of subjects that you cover.
Well, in other features, it will always be about an interview. It will always be about somebody else. And I have decided that I'm going to start featuring some of the oral histories that I've collected, which is World War II survivors, some of the men histories. The privilege that I've had with men is men are not usually ones that, talk about things. It's just not culturally their issue. But I've had the privilege of being the first responder in the sense that men have shared a lot of their life stories with me. Our fishing is one of those. And so we're going to have more of that. So I'll feature that. And then, of course, just different things that I've done over the years. I'm going to be creating a podcast. Not a podcast, but like somewhere to feature the articles with it, because there's birding. I mean, you know me. I'm just interested in anything really that has to do with history.
Yeah. So you're going to get everything from birds to, how long it took us to migrate from Southeast Asia.
And parenting.
And men spilling their feelings to Rlene.
I heard you talking about your son being so proud that your son is working 2 jobs and going to the university. And, we want that kind of generation. We want to encourage people to have pride in themselves and what they want to do. So, yes, I want to start interviewing teenagers because they have a very different perspective on life.
Yeah, they do, definitely. All right, man, it's great talk. I'm a big fan, and I'm so glad that you're back on the network. I'm really interested in listening to this episode, and also I got to give you props again. I know I tell you every time I see you, but I love that fishing documentary. It's totally amazing, and I know that you said you were editing the second
partition.
Right. So what's the timeline on that one?
Well, that's the problem with these video documentaries. It's very detailed on the technical side, but the second partition is about net fishing. The first one was about tradition.
Right.
So we are working on net fishing. We hope that we were going to get it out in Miss tomorrow, but I don't know if we can. Maybe April.
Well, that kind of thing's always evergreen, is what they call it in the industry.
Did you want me to stay on for the clip?
I'll play it because we're running a little bit behind. Like I told you, this is very easy to slip into going way over talking about this with you. So I'm good, but thank you so much, R. And then we'll pop it up on our networks, and I'll send you the links.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for
There
having
you
me
go.
back.
All right, Rlene Steffy there with the Rlene Live podcast. We're gonna play this clip now. I'm telling you, this is really interesting stuff because, like she had said, we've been looking a lot at archaeology and linguistics to determine, our roadmap to where we are now. And DNA testing is a big part of it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in this clip where they talk about kind of like the sanctity of testing, ancient remains for DNA, and some of the ways that the scientific community has worked around the way we feel about our ancestors, basically being dug up and dissected. And so it's a pretty interesting clip, and it's right here, right now. It is 7:25. Remember, coming up, we're going to go over all the eligibility requirements for Programma Salapi. That's then. This is now on the link. Good morning.
We know that there have been digs here on Guam. We know that archaeology has done a wonderful job to inform us of periods that we would not have otherwise known had there not been construction along Tomhum. But is it only from those digs that the studies are possible? There are different people who agree or disagree to the study of ancient remains. And when we say ancient, we're talking, hundreds of years backwards, right? So is it from that your study can be informed, or further than that?
Well, the ancient remains are a controversial topic and are going to continue to be a controversial topic for a couple of reasons. Some people consider the remains of the people or their ancestors, in a sense, sacred and they need to be preserved, need to be cared for and respected. And ancient DNA ultimately is a destructive process because to get the DNA, you have to, you said sink your teeth. It's interesting you use the word tooth because for many years it was teeth that people would drill to get the DNA in. And the reason that it's destructive, as opposed to you working with modern people where they're willing to give you a little saliva, spit into a tube, no problem. I mean, that's still your DNA. We did the swab, right? When in 2013, that's what we used to use. So that is still sort of, you're sort of giving a very small and very replaceable part of your saliva, but you are sort of doing that. We need that because we study biology, we study part of life. And then we can't get saliva, we can't really get blood as something replenishable from ancient remains. So ultimately you have to destroy a tiny bit of a tooth or a tiny bit of a bone to get to it. And I understand why that would be troublesome. And lots of projects have been stopped at that point because of that. And I'm in full agreement with people when they say, no, I don't think this should happen to these people. When we are able to get some DNA, whether it's from a tooth or they do this other, now they're using even smaller, I'm talking grams of DNA. So very, very small amounts of bone powder from an inner ear bone called the petrous bone. When that is used, your chance of success is much, much higher. And it's been done now in a way that doesn't destroy the integrity of that bone. And then the tooth, when it was done back then, you might break off one of the roots of the bone and try to get to the center of it. So you would try to do it in utmost respect. But that was ultimately the only way we know to get to those DNA of those people. And when we get to the DNA of those people, because they were living at one point, we can actually say things in a very conclusive way. Whereas the work I was doing with modern DNA, we can try to look at what's around now in 2022 and guess at patterns from the past. Whereas with ancient DNA, we have something in the past and we can get to the biology of that person. And then sometimes we infer from things going further past, or we can compare the modern and the one from 2,000 years ago, say, and then we can infer patterns of things that happen in between those two time periods. So it allows us to do that. But I stress to everybody that it needs to be done with complete engagement with the community, complete, blessing and complete approval from the community, especially the people who ultimately are the descendants from those remains. And those we strongly believe are the people living in the Marianas today. And we know that we can guess that because of the DNA from modern people that people more willingly give, but also from just doing a few people, you can see there is a connection between the ancient and the modern. And these were, in a sense, ancestors to the living Chamorros. That said, any one person that lived 2,000 years ago may have contributed an infinitesimally small amount of DNA to somebody living today. So it could be somebody's ancestor, but the amount of DNA connecting them is a fraction of 1%, most likely. So that said, it is your ancestor, and yet your connection biologically is not very strong. So then it becomes a question of your connection culturally or spiritually. And that I can't speak to as a genetic anthropologist, but I do respect it as best I can. So somebody feels they have strong spiritual connections or strong cultural connections to remains, then I think that's a moment where we can say, well, we will not work on these remains. And people began to do DNA extractions from the soil around a dig. You've been able to get DNA that leaks at the time of death or after the time of death from a skeletal remains. People feel more comfortable, fine. You can't drill into the skull or drill into the tooth, but you can extract DNA from the soil that's right next to it. So we've been able to do that, and that technology is very young, but getting better. And people may be able, sometimes people are buried with an item. We might be able to get some DNA from the item buried with that individual, clothing and other things like that. So there's other ways to do it without.
The KUAM Podcast Network is back and on demand, featuring a great variety of podcasts from our island and region, including culture, lifestyle, awareness, crime, politics, commentary, comedy, and entertainment. Available on most streaming platforms. The KUAM Podcast Network. Subscribe and listen now.
Join Nestor Lecanto for virtual in-depth discussions with the movers and shakers in our community every Wednesday on In Full Zoom. Presented by IT&D and Calvo Enterprises, Inc. Watch Mariana's artists, activists, and visionaries and their quest to protect, preserve, and promote our CHamoru culture on The Culture Club, a weekly feature on KUAM News digital platforms and the KUAM News Weekend Edition. Brought to you by Tropical Ice.
No bone is too hot for me.
That's hot, Barnett. Thank you.
I just get emotional in February because Valentine's.